How did you ever get like involved in this area of study? I guess I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it's it's a long story. Um, so I was at the University of Rhode Island. I mean, psychology is a second career for me. I was
Okay.
formerly a Roman Catholic priest for a few years, and then went into psychology. So then I kind of was working with getting my PhD and decided I wanted to work with Jim Prochaska. And so we just kind of got together and start thinking about this integrative model of change. And then I, on my dissertation, actually tested some of the strategies that people were using to change. And it's been that way. That was 1977, 78.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we've been doing this quite a while.
Yeah. No, that's great. So it's always interesting to, you know, I don't think anything happens by accident. So but
No,
it's
no.
interesting, you know. So,
No, actually, I was studying smoking cessation, and I was smoking at the time. So uh, I know this. My research helped one person anyway because I quit.
there you go. Dr. David Fawcett, who has done presentations on this platform,
Uh-huh.
talks about how problematic, smoking and vaping are. In fact, our treatment center, Seeking Integrity, is a non-smoke, non-vape, and because otherwise you're keeping that dopamine, drip
Yep.
going, and the relapse rate is so much higher for people that continue to think that that's a benign little thing. So, or it's better than the other thing. So,
Oh yeah. No, I have a center where we're actually doing a lot of work on behavioral health, trying to get behavioral health providers to actually work with behavioral health patients to kind of quit smoking.
it's important. So,
Yeah.
so it is time. So, thank you all for joining us so far. More will be coming. So I'm going to remind everybody that this is video recorded. So you cannot request to share. Well, you can request to share, but you're going to get X'd out because we want to keep this anonymous so that these can be posted. So if you have questions, if you'd message them to me, and then I will ask them to Dr. DiClemente at various times. He's going to take little pauses, and so you'll be able to ask the questions. So how I reached out to him was a long story, but ultimately I was going, what is meaningful for recovery? And I saw his topics on change, and I thought, wow, it's the thing that we don't want to do, kicking and screaming. Sometimes we come into recovery, but it's the thing we have to do, and it's also the most beneficial. So if he can give us pointers on how to do it, what to look for and that type of thing, I thought that could be really beneficial. So I invited him, and he graciously accepted. And so I'm going to toggle off my audio. You can follow along on the slides there at the top of the screen. You can download them and follow along. And I'm going to toggle off. I message me questions if you'd like to ask them, and I will ask them to have them answered at various points along the way. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Tammy. I appreciate that, and I'm really pleased to be here with all of you. Um, I have been doing this, as we just said, for a number of years, kind of working in the area of addictions and kind of understanding the change process and how people change. That's really my research. So I want to talk today a little bit about this recovery as a journey, and a little bit about the strategies that we need for long-term successful behavior change. So I don't know if you're familiar with this, but SAMHSA has, since I think 2012 or something, a definition that they talk about the recovery. Recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. So recovery is built on evidence-based treatments and support services and all of those kind of things. But recovery is a personal journey, as all of you know. I mean, and I'm preaching to the choir in lots of ways. And it's not just putting a Band-Aid on a wound. It's not just stopping the substance or just going to treatment. That doesn't do it. Recovery is a more holistic process that includes wellness and taking charge of your lives. And so that's where this change process hopefully comes in. There really are two very different types of change, behavior changes. There may be more, but I talk about these two. When we talk about imposed behavior changes and chosen behavior changes. And that distinction, I think, is important because I can make people change if I have control over their environment and all the other kind of things. And, I tell people I can make drug addicts quit using substances. I just need a really good jail, guards I can trust, nobody flying drones into the prison yard, and I can make people change. But that's imposed change. And what you see a lot of times with imposed change in the prison system is, as soon as people get free of the imposition, they go back to doing whatever they were doing. So imposed change is making you do something that you don't want to do. And prison is one of those, but there's a lot of them. I mean, a lot of times for one of the partners, often in a divorce, it's imposed change. For one, it's chosen, and one, it's imposed. When you have losses and deaths and all of this stuff with the pandemic and friends and family who have been lost, that's an imposed change. Sometimes work tells you to do things that you really don't want to do, and that's an imposed change. Or here's how we're going to do it, and you don't think that's a good idea. And sometimes treatment is an imposed change. We used to kind of make a distinction between people who were kind of mandated to treatment and people who weren't. And then when we start asking people who weren't mandated to treatment, many of them said, well, I feel mandated. Actually, my wife and my parents and everybody's been pushing me to do this. So sometimes even treatment is really an imposed change on people. Why we call it imposed is the primary reason for that change is extrinsic. It's outside of us. It's driven by external forces and motivations, and it's not intrinsic. And that contrasts dramatically to what I'm going to be talking about, which is chosen behavior change. Because chosen behavior change is intentional, and it's intrinsically or internally motivated. It's where you take ownership of the change, and that's the only way it gets integrated into your lifestyle. So recovery really requires chosen behavior change to live this self-directed life. So it's really something that's critical. All of us need chosen behavior change, but I think in recovery it's even more important. The reason that distinction is important is we respond differently to changes that are viewed as imposed. And you can see that in spades across the country these days, where people are kind of just rejecting some of the science-based kinds of recommendations and kind of saying, no, you can't tell me what to do. I don't have to wear a mask. And people are getting angry. So when you impose a change, it elicits resistance. Often it elicits minimal adherence. They will only do it as little as possible. Most of the time they try to escape the imposition or the change that you're pushing on them. And it's also filled sometimes with self-deception and distortion, because in order to kind of, you change your view of what's happening if you impose a change on someone. If you see change as chosen, it's much more that you have to do a serious consideration, you have to make a decision, you have to plan, you have to make commitment, and you have to continue these efforts despite the setbacks to kind of deal with it. And we'll talk more about that along the way. However, chosen adaptive behavior change does include a lot of times acceptance of the reality of a lot of our life-altering events. So, yeah, it means we have to accept some of the things, our own limitations sometimes, what's happened, that the divorce really is going through, that, you have to accept some of these things. And it was really interesting when I was at the University of Houston. I had a sociology friend, colleague, who was studying change as well, but from a sociological perspective, and she wrote a book called Becoming an X, and how to successfully become an ex anything. And she was an ex-nun. So she kind of, but the idea behind the book was, from a sociological perspective, you don't become an ex. You make the change, you accept the change, and that basically then you're no longer an ex, because if ex is all your identity, I'm an ex spouse of this person, or I'm an ex-wife, or I'm an ex-husband, then that's not a good idea. That's not a recovery identity even from a divorce. So you need to kind of think about those things as well. And a lot of times it's not really clear. So we'd like to be really clear, but sometimes even there's a sense of being imposed upon in some chosen changes. So a lot of us make changes kind of kicking and screaming while we go through to do it. And there's often choices in some imposed changes. I mean, if somebody imposes change, I mean, for some people in prison, they have accepted that prison and have chosen to go into their own growth and recovery and rehabilitation. So it's hard to see sometimes what's imposed and what's chosen. And I really love the serenity prayer because I think that's really critical. And I've added a little thing onto it. So the prayer is obviously grant us serenity to accept the things we cannot change, and know the limits of what we really can do, the courage to change the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I've also added the dedication to continue the change journey despite difficulties and defeats, because I think that's a really important piece of this process that we go through. And I'm sure all of you know that serenity prayer well. And the whole idea is when we think about change, I mean, and I know you're thinking about it from a recovery perspective, but from any kind of a perspective, when we think about health promotion, disease prevention, all of it requires behavior change. So if I'm thinking about cancer prevention or wellness or health promotion or medication compliance, if I'm thinking about mental health issues that I have to deal with, or substance use, I have to either start a new behavior, stop a problematic behavior, or modify a current behavior. So those are three different patterns of change. And I think that's really helpful for us to understand. What we really want to be is in this middle range here. We really would like to be in this moderated, self-regulated behavior pattern. So you do something, it gives you feedback, and you go, okay, well, I guess I shouldn't be doing as much of that, and you change your behavior. And that's where we want to be. That's what self-regulation is. It's kind of understanding where we are, what we need to do, getting feedback, understanding the feedback, and doing it. And it's not new. In Roman times, there was a saying that was, in medio stat virtus. Virtue is in the middle. Virtue is that moderated area that we're talking about. But a lot of times we are not doing some of the things that we need to do. So there's an absence of behavior. And then sometimes there's an excess of behavior. We tend to do too much of this behavior. And that's essentially what addiction is excessive behavior that causes problems, excessive appetitive behaviors that cause problems. So basically, when we get into excess, we should get some feedback. So again, what is the hangover? The hangover is the sign that says you overdid it. And that should help you to kind of move back into the moderated self-regulated and say, no, I can't drink that much. I can't drink, sometimes we just fool ourselves. Say, well, I'm never drinking that drink again. But it's the alcohol, not the actual drink, as we know. So we have to go back to excess. When we believe that this person cannot be in this moderated self-regulated behavior pattern, we say you need to abstain. Because basically you've tried it, it hasn't worked. This doesn't seem to be something that you can do. So abstinence may be the thing that you need to do. But other behaviors like physical activity, an absence of that, if you're a couch potato, we'd say, no, you got to get up and do some of that. But you never want to be like the person with anorexia who sometimes gets into excessive exercise. And so a little bit does well, a lot of it might really be helpful. So then they excessively exercise, and even to their threatening their health. So then you have to kind of keep going back and saying, well, wait a minute, you need to moderate this. We need to kind of get back in there. And diet is difficult because diet is always, we have to moderate. We don't start eating or stop eating. We have to change the way we eat. And that may be even harder than stopping something That's true. And if you see, there's a lot of prescribed health behaviors, and that's the point here is that when we look at something that we want to do, we want to reduce cardiovascular risk. There's a lot of things that we have to do. It's not one thing. So for some of us, I mean, it's physical activity, it's cholesterol screening, sometimes it's weight reduction, you have to do dietary changes. I'm on an aspirin regimen because I have a family history. And then you have to be careful if you're cardiovascular of any kind of substance use that you're doing. Diabetes has the same list of things. And you could make that same list for asthma and obesity prevention and chronic lung disease. You can make it. And the whole point is what we're being asked to do a lot of times are multiple things. And we aren't always ready for all of those things. We may be ready for some, but not others. And so that's where we come in here. So if I think about how to be healthy, health behaviors are multiple. They're multidimensional. As I said, there's many of them. They vary sometimes in frequency and intensity. And sometimes here I kind of say, well, I love colonoscopy. No one really loves colonoscopy, okay? But if you have a colonoscopy it's once every 10 years if it's clear. So it's really low in frequency. It's relatively high in intensity. So yes, you have to do all of the stuff, prep stuff and whatever, and then get the colonoscopy. So a lot of the things that we do, if I have to take medication 5 times a day, that's much more intense than taking medication once a day. So we need to kind of think about that, because I think we need to think about what's the change burden on the individual. And we do need to kind of keep making that change burden as small as we can. So if something can be, if you can take medication once a day, take it once a day, and ask your doctor that, because if he gives it to you 3 times a day, it's much less likely to be adhered to. So we want to kind of make sure that we're asking and doing it efficiently and making the change efficiently. And depending on the intensity and the frequency, it requires different levels of motivation and can be integrated into your lifestyle. I mean, when the first HIV medications came out, there were like 5, 6, 7 medications that you had to take. Some you had to take with meals, some without meals, some in the evening, some 4 times a day. You had to dedicate your whole life to that medication regimen almost. So it was really difficult to be integrated into your regular life. You almost had to kind of stop your regular life and do this for a while, because that was what you had to do. And obviously, many of us have had this experience. You go to your doctor and the doctor says the best way to achieve good health, take good care of yourself. Your lifestyle is really bad. You've got to work on that. You got to change your eating habits, stop smoking and drinking, start an exercise program, get plenty of rest, learn how to handle stress. And a lot of times patients are very acquiescent. Oh, yes, of course, doc, you're right. And they walk out and go, I got to find another doctor. Because many of us, it just is overwhelming because there's so many things we have to do. We got to go, okay, we give up. So we need to be careful not to overwhelm ourselves with our changes, but really kind of keep working on them. And there's lots of interesting examples. This is from the Baltimore Sun. There was an article a while back that said heart patients are not reaping the fruits of research. So we know, medical research knows that what the causes are and how to prevent heart attacks. Avoid smoking, control cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar. If you did all of those things, you could nearly eliminate all of the heart attacks. But 16 million people are living with coronary heart disease, and 500,000 die from it each year. So we know some of the things we need to do, we don't always do it. And that's part of the challenge of change, is what I call it. And most of us, of course, we're talking about other people, not ourselves. Most of us know many cases of people not changing when it would be in their best interest to change or to do so. And I mean, we could point our fingers at ourselves as well as other people, that's for sure. So why don't people change? So when we talk about that, you say, oh, well, why don't people change? I mean, it's in their best interest to do so. Well, it's not a single thing. There's a number of elements of this, and that's where the stages of change come in. Even in lay language, we either say, oh, the person's just not convinced, they're unmotivated, or they're not committed, they're unwilling, or they don't believe they can do it, so they're unable, or believe they're unable. So those are the different ways that people, or the different aspects of the change process that we need to kind of be aware of. And also many people are like this. This is the cartoon. I'm addicted to the internet because it's more interesting than people. So is there a pill you can give to everyone else to make them more interesting? And then Delbert goes over and says, doctors never want to treat the underlying problem. But many of us would like to change other people instead of changing ourselves. So we have that challenge as well. So I'm going to take a minute. If there's any questions, Tammy, you can ask me that, and then we're going to start, because I'm going to ask you then to kind of do something and think about a change.
Okay, so for those of you, this is recorded, so we don't have people go to the requesting to share, but if you message me any questions, right now there are not, but I want to remind everybody too that you can be following along. And the presentation is in the blue bar above the speaker box. You can download that and follow along. It's great information. I'm following along. It's helpful, but he will be stopping at different intervals. So pop those questions to me and I'll be happy to ask them to be answered. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so now, I mean, I talked a good bit. I want you guys to think about stuff. So if you have paper and pencil, you can actually write some stuff down as well. Think about a change that you are either seeking to make or that somebody else thinks you should make, but you're not convinced yet that that's really the case. And just jot it down or think about it in your head. Be as specific as possible. What is the change? And think about what would it take for you to make that change in terms of your own current lifestyle and behavior. So what would it take? And then think a little bit about the significant challenges, barriers, or obstacles that you see in making that change. And again, be as specific as possible, because again, we're talking about behavior change, and specificity is really important. So we want to be specific about who, what, where, how, when, all of those pieces of the change that you're thinking about. And what would that be? So I'm going to give you just 30 seconds to kind of think about that. I'll shut up for a minute and let you guys kind of write some stuff down and do that. Okay, so what I want you to do is keep that change, or maybe you thought of a couple of things, keep that in mind as we're going through this, because the whole rest of it is really kind of talking about how we would make that change and whether you're going to make that change and some of the things that we've been studying and identifying. So when we often kind of think about change, we think many people are waiting for the miracle, that somehow or other something's going to happen that's going to make this change miraculously happen. Like Paul in the Bible knocks off his horse and then he kind of gets it. So somehow or other we're going to get that message, but we wait for it. I believe it's the other side of that slide. God helps those who help themselves. So if you're waiting, it's not I'm against miracles, but if you're waiting for a miracle, you best be working on that part of it. And so that's really where we come in. So when we think about it, okay, how do people change? So if I wanted you to change something, what would you have to do? Well, People change voluntarily. And again, I'm talking about chosen intentional change. So people change voluntarily when they become interested and concerned about the need for change. They become convinced that the change is in their best interest, or it's going to benefit them more than it's going to cost them. Okay? They organize a plan of action and get committed to implementing that plan. And finally, they take the actions necessary to make the change and then to sustain the change over time. Okay? So the hope is that many of you actually recognize these aspects from other changes that you've already made. But this is really what it takes to make change happen. And that really is how we've kind of developed an understanding of the stages of change. So the stages of change are a way to kind of understand the process of change. When I first got into this field, I mean, if you had a problem with substance use, you had to bring the motivation to the treatment. Nobody, I mean, people got thrown out of treatment because they were not motivated. Doctors would tell people with alcohol problems as they walked in the door, they say, okay, well, stop drinking and I'll help you. Of course, the people with alcohol problems are going, well, if I could stop drinking, why the hell would I need your help? So that's the challenge, is that motivation used to be something that you expect. And all of our treatments were action oriented. And so what we realized and how this model developed was, wait a minute, there's pre-action steps that we need to kind of be focused on. And many people were called, I mean, one of the better names for people who did not want to change was resistant, but they were called a lot of things, and they were confronted with a lot of angry talk and yelling at them and berating them for not wanting to change. We said, well, wait a minute, let's think about this process. And so pre-contemplation is just, the person is just not interested in changing. And when we measured that in our research, in our first research, it was, are you seriously thinking about quitting smoking in the next 6 months? If you said no, you were in pre-contemplation. Now, you could have said no, you could have said hell no, you could say I'm never quitting. But from a change perspective, you're all in pre-contemplation. And I'll show you why it may be harder for some people and some rationales to kind of get people out of pre-contemplation, but that's it. And then contemplation is that you're thinking about change, and you need to make a decision. Preparation is what it says, preparing. Action is the initial change, and then maintenance, because when we started using this model, Alan Marlatt was doing a lot of his work on maintenance and relapse. And so maintenance became something that was, maintaining change was a big issue for lots of people. So then we said, okay, there's a next stage of maintenance. So these are the stages, but the importance is not just that I can identify, oh, you're not interested in change. It's, what do I have to help people to do, and what do I have to do if I'm in pre-contemplation? If I'm in pre-contemplation, I have to get interested and concerned and willing to consider. I have to open myself up to at least a thoughtful consideration of the possibility of change. In contemplation, I have to do more of a risk-reward analysis. What to get to decision making and a decisional balance that I'll talk about in a minute. In preparation, I have to build a commitment and create an effective, acceptable plan, and that's critical. And that's all before I take action. Action is then implementing the plan and revising it as needed, and we'll talk more about that as well. And then maintenance is really consolidating that change into my lifestyle. So it's no longer what I have to do, it is how I live my life. So that's what we say about diets. Don't go on a diet. All diets are 99.5% ineffective, because people go on diets, they go off diets. You have to change the way you eat permanently. And that's what we talk about maintenance. It's not, oh, I'm dieting so I can't do this. It's, this is the way I eat. So that's what we're really trying for when we get to that maintenance stage, is sustaining change by consolidating it and making it part of us and part of who we are and how we live. So those are the stages of change. And I'm sure if any of you went to treatment programs, you may have heard that already. Some of you may have been told about that. Some of you may have studied it. Some of you may have even had to do the book Changing for Good or something like that in your treatment programs. So yes, yeah, I am one of the people responsible for that. Hopefully that was helpful. But what you see then is what we have is a template for understanding change and understanding motivation and movement. And if you think about pre-contemplation and contemplation, it's what we kind of talk about as unmotivated, but it breaks it down. And unwilling is in that preparation stage if you're not going to do a commitment. And unable is I'm doing it, but I can't do it well enough to kind of sustain it through action and maintenance. Okay. And I do want to mention that this process is not just for individuals and individual change, but has also been applied to organizations and service providers and other kinds of things. Because we have some service providers who don't change very easily. And so some of them are unwilling to take on the new perspective or unwilling to change. And it's a struggle. I mean, I was with one program and, they had a lot of trauma, and we have some treatments for trauma in terms of, work that's been done by a number of researchers in terms of exposure and relaxation and that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of pushback from a lot of providers of not doing that. We don't want to do any exposure because that could be dangerous to them. But it was helpful. And so there's now some of them have accepted that and are incorporating that as part of their trauma care. So these are really different parts of the puzzle that we talk about as motivation and behavior change and readiness to change. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to either write questions or think about this. So now that you know that the stages of change, take that behavior or those behaviors that you were thinking about that I asked you about before, and think about where you are with those. Think about what you are wanting or needing to change, and where are you, and whether and how you're maybe going to do it. Identify where you are in the stage of change for any of the behavior changes that you thought about. And again, usually you won't identify one that says you're in pre-contemplation, but that's one that your spouse will tell you that you need to do this, and you go, no. That one you're probably in pre-contemplation for. So you identify that, and then just think about what would it take to get you to move forward along the stage. What is your next biggest challenge or hurdle that you would have to do? And you don't have to do it now because you can't do it in this format, but feel free after the session to share some of these observations with someone else and talk about that with somebody else, and but tell the person, you just don't solve any problems for me, just listen. And you can talk and let them listen, and it's very important that you kind of talk it out as to where you are, and you'll discover more about where you are if you do that. So I'm going to stop again for a minute and let you do some thinking. If anyone wants to write a question at the end of this, I'll ask about questions, but I'll stop for a minute. Give you another 15 seconds or so. Okay, anybody want to share anything or any questions or thoughts?
Feel free to message me if you'd like me to read something. I will share mine sort of unwillingly. I thought of two relationships, and one highly motivated to work on it. Like I want to be empathetic. It's a situation where, I don't understand. I don't suffer from that particular thing myself, and so just calming down. You said don't have someone listen and don't fix it, and I'm a fixer. I want to help you. Have you thought about this? Have all these resources? So with this particular person, what I need to do is just listen and not try to fix things. The other relationship is one where I was like, I'm maybe pre-contemplative. I'm not, I'm in the, at best, contemplation, but highly unmotivated, because I don't feel like there's any merit in, like, this particular relationship is a familial one, distant, just there's nothing to be gained that I perceive. So, but when you say what is the biggest hurdles for you making this change, on both of them, it's me. I mean, it's me. It's, my willingness or unwillingness, my nature, all of those, it's all within me is the challenges that I have to overcome, as a hurdle to get there. So.
Yeah. No, change is a personal journey. I mean, recovery is a personal journey. Change is a personal journey. You've got to take it. It's what I'm hoping is from this talk is that you'll also pick up some things that, so what do I need to do with this one? If I really am in contemplation, I need to do more decisional balance kinds of things. If I really don't think this is worth it, then I have to kind of at least think, okay, am I being fair, or is this, should I think about this some more or not? Because you could just say, no, I'm not going to do it. And then, there's a lot of things we're in pre-contemplation for that we just don't want to do something about it. So we're not going to do it, and we're not going to pay any attention. And you don't put any energy in it either. And that's why we kind of stay in pre-contemplation for a lot of different kinds of things, because we don't want to kind of have to put a lot of energy in.
And if it was just me, I probably wouldn't do anything. But there are more people involved in that, so, and I don't want to put other people in difficult situations. So it's a good reminder that me working on my motivation to change is going to have to be my first step on that particular one. So.
Yep. Right. Any other thoughts or questions?
Not yet.
Okay.
Again, if you've got questions, please put them in the message to me, and I will ask them. Would love to have other people's input on this. This is really useful stuff. Even with the Serenity Prayer, I thought, man, I have used that as a mantra of, what can I change? Everything outside of me, people, places, things, situations, all of those things. What can I change? My actions and reactions. But I liked that you were you added the dedication to continue. So a reminder that if you message me, I'm going to X you out. If you go in the people requesting to share, just message me and I will read it. But this is recorded. We're keeping anonymity. But that the Serenity Prayer, like there have been times I just said it as a mantra to calm myself down because I was agitated by everybody else. Like the cartoon is like, give everybody else a pill so that they're more interesting. If everybody would just do what they're supposed to do according to
the world would be a much better place. No question.
Not necessarily, but in my moment, that's what I'm thinking. So.
Yeah. Okay. So again, just think about your changes and think about some of the things you're doing. And again, what we're trying to do is kind of realize, what do I have to do in pre-action stages to then kind of move into the action link? And that's what we're trying to do. People think about pre-contemplation as sometimes just a place where people are that they just don't think about stuff. But a lot of times people are staying in pre-contemplation on purpose. that it's more, and they use these, what I call the 5 R's. So why don't people move out of pre-contemplation? Well, some people, I enjoy doing this. This is what I like to do. I'm not going to change it. So we call that reveling. Everybody's reluctant to change. Nobody really likes change. I like to say the person who knows that the best is Obama. Because when he got elected, all the banners were changed and all the signs were changed. And then he goes in and goes, well, let's change this. And they go, well, no, that's a little hard. You don't want to do that. Let's change this. No, that's not easy. Well, maybe we could just do healthcare. Oh yeah, right. That's going to be. So again, most of us are reluctant to change. I mean, many of us don't even like detours. I mean, we get all upset about a detour. So there is reluctance. We aren't really change lovers. We like to kind of get into a stable set of habits and just kind of stay there and do that. The third R is really rebellious. That a lot of us have this aspect that, no, nobody can tell me what to do. And especially if somebody else is telling you you need to change this, or a spouse is telling you need to change this, you go, oh yeah, well that they don't understand what it is. No, nobody can tell me. I make my own decisions. And you see that a lot in this whole issue with both the vaccine and the masks and all the other kind of stuff currently. There's another group of people who are resigned. I used to find a lot of these folks in the older smokers. And they would be kind of almost feeling hopeless. I can't do it. I've smoked for 30 years. I can't not smoke. Well, you can actually, but you believe you can't. And so that resignation is different. And then finally, there's people who kind of rationalize. And, I like to say the difference between a rationalization and a reason, reasons are mine and rationalizations are yours. That basically I can always see the flaws in your reason, but not in my own. So for me, they're reasons. So when I meet a person who says, well, I have a 90-year-old, there's got to be a lot of these 90-year-old grandparents who are smokers, and they're still alive and they're still doing fine. So we must have really good genes. Now, that's, from my perspective, a rationalization, because we know that there aren't that many 90-year-old smokers out there, and many of them have COPD and lung problems and whatever. So, but I can't go after these. I have to kind of figure out a way to get around each of these things when I'm talking to people. So if somebody's rebellious, the motivational interviewing says, you just give them choice. It's really your choice. You can choose what you want to do or not. So I'm not going to fight you about this because it's your life. You're right. Where the reluctant person, you might need to kind of give them some reasons and help them kind of understand that it's really important to do this and it needs to come up on their list of things to do. Where the resigned person needs hope. They need to see maybe that there's some other people around who have made this journey and have done it, who are like them. Because that's what they're like. Say, it's like, well, no, nobody's like me. Yeah, well, I mean, actually, when I was running my alcoholism treatment center in Houston, if someone came in pre-contemplation, I would actually tell them to go to an AA meeting and you don't have to speak, just sit there, listen, and then come back and tell me why you're not like all these other people who are at the meeting. Because that's what they were going to come back and tell me to do anyway. So, but at least they would go and they tell me, oh, I'm not like those people. I mean, I haven't lost this yet. I haven't done that. And so that's a way to kind of also do that. So what we're struggling to do is what I call untying the knots. These are the pre-contemplation is somebody who is not interested in change. And so you want to kind of untie the knots, however they've tied them, with these different R's. And then when you move into contemplation, we talked about the decisional balance. So when you think about that, think about on the no change side, there are the pros for what I'm doing now, but there's also the cons of change. On the change side, there's the cons of what I'm doing now and the pros for change. And that's important that you look at both of those, because a lot of times I know when I was doing treatment and stuff, people would come in and you say, well, how does your drinking really help you? Oh, it doesn't help. It's terrible. I don't, it's no good. I know it's bad for me, blah, 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 blah. I'm going, if it didn't do anything for you, why the hell are you doing it? That doesn't make any sense. So a lot of times they underplay some of the pros for the status quo. And it's important to understand that, because those are things that you're going to have to deal with when you change. So for example, yeah, well, I like sitting and just watching TV, and it's really, I mean, I enjoy doing that. I deserve the relaxation. So trying to get this person out of the couch and into some physical activity, you have to kind of also look at and they have cons for change too. They kind of go, okay, well, yeah, well, then I'm going to be sore. I'm going to have problems. I don't want to do that. I mean, I could create heart problems. Who knows? So all of those things argue against change. On the change side, you have to look for the cons, the things that aren't working well with this particular behavior or without this particular behavior. I'm getting too heavy. I'm doing, so I need to do some physical activity. And the pros for change. So if I do this, I mean, what we do in a lot of the tobacco is we talk about what will happen in the first month, what are the benefits of it in the first 6 months, what about in the first year. Your heart is pumping well, you're breathing better, you're doing all these kind of things. So we really want to emphasize some of the pros for change, because people tend to focus on the cons for change. I'll be anxious, I'll be nervous, what will I do with my hands, what will I do? So we want to do that. And when we're thinking about this, remember, it's not just the number of reasons that you have on either side of that balance. It's how important those reasons are. So what you want to do is always think about, connect some of the reasons for change with some of the values that you have about yourself, about your family. So doing this would be really helpful for my family. My health, my whatever it is, but go in and explore that value to enable that piece of consideration and decision-making piece on the change side to kind of have more weight. So that's what you're trying to do. So ultimately, the decisional balance, if you can build one that's big enough and has more weight on the change side than the no change side, then usually people make a decision.
Do you ask them, like, as they're doing this, like, how important, like, because you said it isn't about filling out the numbers of the lines, but it's about, how important they are. So do you have them, like, how important is that particular one to you? Do you have them kind of scale that or think about that aspect as they're doing this?
Yes. In our group therapy manual, what we have done is kind of have them write out the reasons, but then also rate them on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 or something like that. So how important these are. So then if you sum down, you can see, I give the example of somebody who, most of you or many of you may have tried to talk somebody out of a relationship that you thought was not good for them, right? And you could give all kinds of reasons on the one side of why to change. It's really bad. This person doesn't treat you well. There's a lot of cons to this status quo. They're abusive. You could be free. You could find somebody really nice. You could do all that. And there may be only one thing on the other side. And what is it? I love him, right? And as soon as you say, oh, I love him, you're lost, because I love him weighs 100 pounds and all the other reasons come out to about 50 pounds. And so it just doesn't compute for them and they stay with that person. So we have to kind of really work with the value and kind of help them make some values on one side. So if I'm going to do that particular one, I need to kind of find the value of loving yourself and see if I could build that value up on the change side, because you have the other value on the other side. So we need to kind of make sure that we're looking at things that are important to us and connecting them to changes. And some of the ideas behind this, some of the things, so decisional considerations are personal. There's lots of personal reasons people have. Some of them seem silly to other people, but they're mine. And so you want to kind of explore yours. You want to see, there's how you can understand the increasing costs of the current behavior. Okay, that maybe I need to focus on that. If I'm, too heavy and not active, maybe I need to look at that and look at myself more, or maybe weigh myself, which people avoid doing for that very reason. So, and then you also want to try to increase the benefits, your perception of the benefits of the change. Um, Most of us are in that ambivalent area. On the one hand, it'd be really good to do it, but on the other hand, and as soon as you hear the but, you have this ambivalence that goes back and forth. And in our first research project, we followed um, hundreds of people without doing any intervention, just seeing what would happen to them. And we had a whole group of people who came into the project in contemplation for quitting smoking. If you said, "Are you seriously thinking about quitting smoking in the next 6 months?" they'd say yes. And what happened next 6 months? They'd say yes. So we followed them for 2 years. They said yes every time that they were seriously thinking about it, but they didn't make any attempt. So lots of people think about change. We call them chronic contemplators. They're always thinking about it, but not really making the decision to go forward. We also think that envisioning change, what would it look like? Try to kind of envision how this change might really benefit you. It's here that culture is important, so that when I talked about values, we're really talking about culturally relevant considerations, things that are important to me, things that are part of my own cultural heritage, part of my own cultural value system. That's what we're looking for. That those are the things that are motivational. And then understand that families can help and hinder. Families can help influence, or they can aggravate us. A lot of times, I know, families have kind of, the more they push, the worse it gets. So you have to, people stop thinking about stuff when somebody else is kind of pushing them sometimes to do it. So you got to think about that. So then you can ask yourselves, when you're looking at these behavior changes, are you motivated for change? And this is what it would look like. I agree, the status quo is problematic. It needs to be changed. The pros for this change really, at least for starting or trying it, is really outweigh the cons right now. Change seems to be in my own best interest. The future might be better if I make these changes. And all of that would mean, yeah, okay, good, you're in the motivated, but it's only the first 2 steps. Because a lot of times what happens is this is Mama, a cartoon. Francis, the Mother's Club, is offering a motivational seminar called Stop Making Excuses. Would you like to go with me? And she goes, nah, it's too hot. I'm tired and I can't find my socks. So, what happens with a lot of that is there is still the procrastination. Even if we've made a decision, we sometimes procrastinate in terms of what to do next. So that's why we need the preparation stage. The preparation stage is really that transition from the pre-action into the action, but it's an important, critical transition. Because during that phase is where you have to build your commitment and create a change plan. And what you want is an action plan coming out of preparation that can be implemented in the near term. Not an action plan you say, well, someday I'm actually going to do that. But you really want a time frame, a kind of when am I going to do that kind of thing. And that increases the probability that you'll do it. It's called implementation intention. Not just an intention to do it, but an intention to implement it at this particular point in time. So that helps setting a time for yourself. Plans are variable. This is a good example of a bad plan. This is a cardiologist's office at the top of a steep flight of stairs. So basically, the whole idea is sometimes we're not aware of how flawed our plans are. That sometimes it's really hard to kind of make good plans or see the flaw in the plan that we're making, and it's not going to work out too well. So again, are you willing to make the change? So this is the willing part. This is the preparation stage part. What does that look like? Well, if you have commitment to take action, if you build a specific action plan or plans, you have a timeline for implementing, these plans are accessible and acceptable to you. And both of those are really important. They need to be effective, so they have to be an effective plan, but they also have to be acceptable to you. Okay, so sometimes, a lot of times when people are given plans by doctors, for example, I had a doctor once give me a plan that we didn't even discuss. He just wrote it down. He said, you need to lose some weight. And he wrote down 1,200 calories a day. Wow. I'm going, that's breakfast. I mean, let's not get crazy here. So that plan was not acceptable to me, and it was never done. So basically, unless the plan has all three of those components, effective, acceptable, and accessible, it's really not going to work. And part of that is also anticipating barriers. What's going to be the most difficult piece of this? I'll stop there again, Tammy, in case there's any questions or comments or thoughts.
Well, I was thinking, and then my phone rang, but I was thinking that when we're making a plan, those of us that are entering recovery do make plans best with a group, having our sponsors, having accountability, and those type of things, because obviously my best thinking got me to the rooms, thank goodness. But, I think it's really easy, like you said, the rationalization and reasons. It's a whole lot better to have, this is what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? And so they could say, have you, that sounds good, or, maybe tweak it this way. So having a collaborative effort on that probably will give me more success.
Yep. If you're open to it, that's true. I sometimes find people who just, no, this is my plan, I'm doing it. I say, okay, let's try it and see. Let's come back next week and tell me how it worked.
I get that all the time with treatment too, or they're like completely in crisis. My relationship is, a disaster and all that. And I, start laying out options, and there's so many reasons. Nope. And then I'm like, I'm sorry, and I hope your loved ones get support, because you are not willing to change, and this is going to, be problematic for them too. So. Right.
That usually means they're in much earlier stages of change. They're really not in preparation, that's for sure. Okay, so all right, so now you have this plan, you're thinking about doing it, you're planning to do it, you've got an implementation. I'm going to start here. So what do you need for successful action? You need the commitment to follow through, even when it's difficult or painful. The first elements, the first time you try something, or the first parts of change, are not that easy. It always creates a little bit of distress, because you're changing what you were doing. You're doing something new. When you're talking about addictions, you've got all the withdrawal piece kind of falling in that very early phase. Without commitment to follow through, you're going to go back early on. I didn't expect this. I didn't think it was going to be this bad. And then you give up. So that's important. And then, the good plan also has to be revised when it's not working. What's happened when a plan isn't working? Most people throw out the change instead of revising the plan. Okay. And that's really critical. So persistence is important. We believe that it takes about 3 to 6 months in action. That we don't even talk about maintenance until someone has established a new pattern of behavior for 3 to 6 months. Because if you look at relapse curves, when most people relapse is really in the early phases. Okay. So this is, can you make the change? Yes. If you continue commitment, you have the skills to implement the plan, because that's the other piece, is sometimes people have plans, but they don't have skills. So you need both of those to be able to do that, and kind of build skills to be able to do it. That you have the self-control strength that you need to be able to follow through, and that it's not exhausted by other problems. A lot of times, we have this dual recovery and dual diagnosis stuff. Well, a lot of times what's really happening for many of those people, what makes change so difficult is they start working on recovery from the substance use, and the mental health problem kind of pulls them and uses up all their strength. And so then they have a tough time working on on that. So you need enough strength, self-control strength to be able to manage these and to help. And that's why you need to support around you. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then long-term follow through, integrating the behavior into your lifestyle, creating a new behavioral norm. Now you're really getting there. That's what this first part of action is. Okay. Tammy, we have time. It's not just till 3 or 4 or 4, or can we have a little more time or not?
We're almost out of time, but I just texted the team and said, can we run a little bit long? Because I see the upcoming slides and I'd like to get to keep going. So
Sure.
so I'd say keep going. Well, so for those
I'm
of you
willing
moving off to
to do
another
that if
meeting,
you're willing,
okay,
and the
I'm
people are there.
hanging with you. Thank you.
Okay, good. So change is not always a linear process. Lots of people think, okay, it just, I'm going to do it, and then you go and it's success. That it really looks like this, as most of you know. Looks like recovery, what it really looks like. And the reason is because of relapse. So I've been doing a lot of work trying to think about what we talk about and how we talk about relapse, because if it happens so often, it's got to have a function. It's not just a mistake. So I'm trying to understand that. So relapse is actually probable with any health behavior change. Actually, the rates of relapse are about the same as addictive behaviors with other chronic conditions. It's really a problem of instigating and sustaining behavior change. Anytime you try and do that, build a new behavior and sustain it, that's a difficult thing. And lots of people don't do that. So I think of it as a problem of not adequately completing all the critical tasks of the stages of change. The other thing that I've been working on is I think relapse, we ought to try and get rid of the term. I think relapse is stigmatizing. We don't use it. I mean, maybe we use it in cancer, but it doesn't have the stigma in cancer. You say, oh, the person relapsed. Their cancer came back. But that's not what we mean when we talk about relapse in addictions. Relapse in addictions is stigmatizing. It's that, oh, you failed. And we should be talking about reoccurrence, and we should be talking about recycling, because this isn't a straight line change. And here's a comparison of relapse rates: drug addiction and other chronic illnesses, hypertension, asthma, type 1 diabetes, all have very similar relapse rates to drug addiction. So it's a matter of making behavior changes. So the problem is that a lot of times we blame and guilt are attached to relapse. And I say sometimes that, if you ask the person who relapsed, they say, oh, the program didn't do it. And if you ask the program, they go, oh no, we have successes. You didn't work the program. And so everybody blames each other about relapse. It's kind of like, wait a minute, there's no reason to do that, because it happens as part of the process. And it doesn't necessarily have to be part of the process. I mean, some people can ultimately get out. So that's the whole point. But it happens a lot. So you need determination despite all the delays and the defeats. So we need hope. We need hope and forgiveness for ourselves. We have to support re-engagement in the process of change. So that's why we talk about recycling. It's not that they just drop, they just recycle. And I did have a judge ask me once, about, it was a drug court, going, how many chances should I give a person to coming back? I'm going, I don't know. I mean, at some point you have consequences, but basically people take 5, 10 times trying before they actually are successful. 2 or 3, 4 treatments. I consult with a dual diagnosis program. Many of those people have been through 5 and 6 different treatments. Their parents have no money left, and they still have problems. So it's a challenge. And there is the issue of, am I recycling or am I just spinning my wheels? Am I just doing the same old thing over and over again, or am I really learning from this reoccurrence. So the whole idea behind the model was it's a hopeful learning perspective. That's how we learn. It's called successive approximation learning. And so again, how do we learn? Well, we have to examine our failures. We have to examine what went wrong. And I've been reading a bunch of books. There's a book, Black Box Thinking book, that he talks about why people won't learn from their failures, is that we don't do what the airline industries do. The airline industry tries to figure out everything that's going on. Now, the black box is symbolic of trying to do that, but it's not the only thing. The black box just sees what happened to the technology and the mechanics, but they go looking in the family. What was the mood? What did the person eat? Did the person drink before they went in the plane? Did this? They look at everything and try to kind of understand the event, examine the data, reconstruct the event, ensure that they understand what went wrong. And what went wrong in the thinking, the feeling, the behavior, the technology, the context, and the circumstances. So they want to look at everything. And that's how we could change this recycling from being a failure to kind of being this. And so this is the cycle of change. And many of you may have seen this, that, you know, people come out, they get into contemplation, preparation, action, they sometimes relapse, they go back in, sometimes they get into maintenance. But most of the time they recycle several times before they really are able to stay here in maintenance. And I even want to change the definition of relapse. Relapse isn't about using the substance. Relapse is about giving up on change. It's when the person gives up that is the relapse. And I think that's another way to look at it. And so why do people cycle? They do it because I think it takes, you got to get all of these things right. You have to have enough interest and a good decision and a strong commitment and a good planning and prioritizing. It's got to be really important. You've got to implement and revise your plan multiple times to get there. And then you've got to finally make sure that it becomes part of who you are and how you live. So that's why, that's the function of recycling. And it's the function of the reoccurrence and the recycling process. The final thing I was going to talk just briefly about is about self-control and self-management. We all need enough of that. And it was interesting that this guy Baumeister talks about self-control strength as a limited resource, that it's like a muscle. And it can become fatigued and depleted, but it also can be replenished with regular exercise. So I learned this actually in a modified therapeutic community visit that I had, that why in the therapeutic community do people have to do small things like wash the dishes and do those kind of things? They're actually strengthening people's self-regulation and self-control. And you have to do this well enough so that you actually build and you move up levels and you do those kind of things. So it's interesting because I think it becomes part of that. And the idea then is self-control is not a limitless resource, that we can't do everything. You've got to conserve it. It can be increased, but not infinitely. It can be strengthened if we exercise our self-control. So sometimes people do that with small things, and that helps them build bigger and stronger muscle. And then what depletes it is all the things that coping with stress, managing negative emotions, post-traumatic distress, managing excessive behaviors, and even inhibiting thoughts, stopping thinking this way. Baumeister found that may even require more self-control strength than performing behaviors. So what I've come up with is this thing about we all need scaffolding, and that's what I think you were talking about, that having people around us, support from others, supporting ourselves, building support for change, and not taking away this scaffolding before the building is built. And finally, recovery is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Substance use behavior change is only the beginning. You have lots of disrupted physical, psychological functioning, development, social relations, meaning in life that you need to heal as part of the recovery process. So sustaining change involves lots of changes in the entire context of our lives and our functioning. So I just urge us to have both a short and a long-term perspective on recovery and on change, because it does take both of those. There's the short term and the long term.
And I think noticing the successes, like if you make a little change,
Yes.
give yourself credit, because it's so easy, particularly for us in addiction, to go, well, I failed, and therefore, what the heck.
Right.
And so I think just noticing, going, well, that's a change for me, even if it isn't exactly what I wanted. I still have made some progress. Progress rather than perfection. So yeah. Thank you for this. This was so helpful. This is another one of the videos I'll be sharing with lots of people, because I'm taking copious notes too. So I'm really grateful for your time. For those of you that joined us, we're going to be starting in about 52 minutes. For Hillary Cash, will be talking about, can internet and gaming really be addictive? And I bet she's going to give us lots of good information on that too. So thank you all.
Thank you all. Good luck to all of you, and good healthy changes.
Thank you. Bye.